I've watched enough folks come and go to know this much. The ones who find their way aren't always looking for a destination. They're running from something. And every now and then, that running leads them exactly where they needed to be all along. I saw it happen once, out in the Arizona territory, back when the land was still wild enough to swallow a man whole. The mule stopped walking. Clay Sands yanked the rope. Nothing. The animal's front leg buckled, and it went down hard on the red dirt. Ribs heaving. 3 days without proper food. 4 with barely enough water to wet his cracked lips. The Chiricahua Mountains rose purple and distant ahead. He knelt beside the mule. Its eye rolled toward him, white-rimmed and glassy. "Come on, old girl." The breath rattled once, then stopped. Clay stayed there, hand on the cooling hide, until shadows stretched long across the sage. When he finally stood, his knees cracked like dry wood. That was when he saw them, 5 Apache warriors, silent as stones, watching from the scrub oak 20 yards away. No weapons drawn, no movement, just eyes. The tallest one pointed east, toward smoke rising beyond the ridge. 2 choices now follow, or die here alone. If this story reached you tonight, I'd love to know where you're watching from. And if you've been enjoying these tales without subscribing yet, we'd be grateful to have you join our little community. The camp spread along a narrow creek, tucked into the folds of the mountain where the pines grew thick. Wickiups dotted the sloop dome-shaped shelters of bent poles and animal hides, smoke curling from their tops into the darkening sky. Clay counted 30, maybe more. Children stopped their games to stare. Women paused over grinding stones. The smell of roasting meat hit him so hard his stomach clenched and his mouth flooded with spit. The warriors led him to the largest wickiup. One gestured toward the hide flap. Clay ducked inside. Firelight, smoke, the dry sweetness of burning mesquite. An old man sat cross-legged on a woven blanket, a silver and turquoise necklace resting on his bare chest. His face was creased like old leather, but the eyes that lifted to meet Clay's held nothing of age. Sharp, measuring. Sit, English, clipped and certain. Clay lowered himself to the packed earth floor, legs aching. "You crossed into our land." The old man's voice carried no anger. "Simple fact, your animal is dead. You have no food, no water, no weapon but the axe on your belt." Clay said nothing, all of it true. "You may leave." The chief tilted his head. "Walk back into the desert. Take nothing with you." The fire crackled. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. Or, the old man's lips curved, not quite a smile. "Or you stay. Work for us. Prove your worth." He paused. "And take a wife." Clay's hands stilled on his knees. "A wife? My daughter." The chief's gaze flickered toward the hide flap, then back. "She is called Ayana, but the camp has other names for her." "What names?" The old man was quiet a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped. "She is difficult to look upon. No man from the neighboring bands will have her. They say she is cursed." Something moved behind his eyes-loss. Maybe. Or something else Clay couldn't read. "You have until sunrise to decide." A younger warrior near the entrance shifted his weight. His lip curled, just slightly. Clay opened his mouth to ask another question, but movement through the wickiup's opening caught his eye. A figure at the far edge of camp, pale deerskin dress, face hidden beneath a woven shawl, standing perfectly still, watching him. Sleep wouldn't come. Clay lay on the buffalo hide they had given him, staring at the smoke hole above. Stars blinked through the gap. The guest wickiup smelled of old hides and wood smoke and something else sage, maybe, or sweetgrass. The sounds of the camp settled around him, a baby crying somewhere, then hushing. Low voices, the crackle of dying fires, the creek's murmur threading through it all. He closed his eyes. The logging camp came back. Always did. In the dark. The crack of splitting timber. The slow, impossible lean of the pine as it fell wrong. Tom's face turning up. Mouth open. No time to run. The weight of the trunk hitting earth like the world itself breaking. Clay's hands had been on the axe. His cuts had weakened the wrong side. 6 months of running hadn't changed that. He opened his eyes. The stars had shifted, hours gone. Or maybe minutes, time moved strange when a man couldn't sleep. His throat burned. The gourd of water they'd left him sat empty. Clay pushed himself up, joints protesting, and ducked through the hide flap into the gray light before dawn. The creek. He followed the sound of running water through the quiet camp. Dogs lifted their heads as he passed, but didn't bark. Good dogs, trained to silence. The creek emerged from the trees, silver in the half-light, pooling behind a small dam of stones before spilling over and continuing downhill. Someone was already there. She knelt at the water's edge, a bundle of cloth beside her, hands working fabric against a flat rock. The woven shawl covered her head and face, leaving only her arms bare to the elbows. Clay stopped. 10 paces between them. She didn't run. Her hands kept moving, small hands, work roughened, the knuckles red from cold water. A thin scar ran across her left palm, pale against the darker skin. He walked to the creek's edge, upstream from where she worked, and lowered himself to his knees. Cupped water to his mouth, drank deep, the cold shocking his teeth. She didn't look up. The sky lightened by degrees, pink threads in the east, the smell of damp earth and pine. Clay finished drinking, sat back on his heels. "Your father gave me a choice," he said, her hands stilled on the fabric. "I'm going to stay." Nothing. The creek ran between them, clear and shallow over smooth stones. Then she gathered her washing and rose. For one moment she paused, half turned toward him, the shawl shifting just enough that he glimpsed the curve of a jaw, dark hair falling loose. Then she walked away toward the camp, and the space where she'd knelt, filled with ordinary morning light. Clay stayed by the water until the sun crested the ridge. The chief's wickiup was already busy when Clay returned. Warriors gathered near the entrance. The young one from last night, the one who'd curled his lip, stood closest to the door, arms folded across his chest. Clay ducked inside. Running Elk sat in the same position, as if he hadn't moved all night. The fire had been rebuilt, fresh flames licking at new wood. "You've decided?" "I'll stay." The chief nodded slowly. "Then you understand the terms. 30 days. You will live in the guest lodge. You will work. If you prove useful to my people, the marriage goes forward." His eyes held Clay's without blinking. "If you fail, or if you run, you leave with nothing. No food, no water, no horse, and the shame follows you." "I understand." "Good." Running Elk gestured toward Clay's belt. "Your axe. You wish to keep it?" "Yes." The chief considered this. "A man is nothing without his tools. Keep it." Outside, voices rose. The young warrior pushed through the hide flap, not bothering to announce himself. He said something in Apache, fast and sharp, and Running Elk answered in the same language. Then the young man turned to Clay, His English was rougher than the chief's, accented but clear. 10 days. That is how long you last, Grey Horse. Running Elk's voice carried warning. Grey Horse ignored him. He stepped closer to Clay, close enough that Clay could smell wood smoke and bear grease in his hair. 10 days. I bet my horse on it. Clay met his gaze. The man was younger, maybe 25, but solid. The kind of solid that came from a life spent hunting and riding. What do I bet at? Grey Horse's smile showed teeth. That is your problem. He turned and left, the hide flaps swinging behind him. Running Elk sighed. My sister's son. He speaks before he thinks. The old man rose, movements slow but steady. Come, I will show you where you sleep. The guest wickiup was smaller than the chief's, tucked at the edge of the camp nearest the creek. Animal hides covered the bent pole frame, darkened by years of smoke. Inside a sleeping pallet. A stone-ringed fire pit. A U.S. cavalry canteen hanging from a pole. Water, Running Elk said, nodding toward the canteen. Food will be brought. Work will be found. Clay stepped inside, set down his axe, first, blade up, handle within reach. Then he sat. The chief watched this ordering with something in his eyes Clay couldn't name. You have done this before, Running Elk said. Arrived somewhere with nothing. Begun again. It wasn't a question. Clay didn't answer. The old man stood at the entrance for a long moment. Then he ducked out and was gone, alone now. Clay looked at the axe. The wood handle was dark with years of sweat. Shaped to his grip. The blade needed sharpening. He could see the nicks from his last job. The pines in the high country. Before Tom, always before Tom. He reached out and touched the cold iron, somewhere outside. A woman's voice rose in song low. Wordless, carrying across the morning air. Not the chief's wife. Younger. Clay's hand tightened on the axe handle. Through the gap in the wickiup's entrance, he could see the edge of camp where Ayanna had stood last night. Empty now, but on the ground near the fire pit. Half hidden under a fold of hide. Something caught the light. A feather. Small. Blue-gray. It hadn't been there when he'd entered. The axe bit into juniper on the third morning. Clay swung again. The blade sank 2 inches. Held. Then pulled free with a crack. Chips flew, pale against the red dirt. He found his rhythm lift, swing, twist, pull, lift, swing, twist, pull. The muscles in his shoulders remembered this, his hands remembered. Most of the young men had ridden out at dawn, hunting deer in the high country. The camp moved slower without them. Women worked the cooking fires, children ran between the wickiups. Their laughter sharp and clear in the morning air. Clay had found the downed juniper at the edge of the tree line, already half rotted on the bottom, but solid enough on top. Good burning wood. Once it dried, he worked through the trunk section by section, stacking the cut pieces in a pile that grew waist-high by midday. The sun climbed. Sweat soaked through his shirt and dried, leaving salt stains on the worn cotton. His palms blistered. Then the blisters broke, and he kept swinging. Children gathered to watch, 3 of them at first, then 5, sitting on a flat rock 20 feet away. They whispered to each other in Apache, pointed at his axe, giggled when he paused to wipe his face. Clay nodded at them. They fell silent, suddenly shy, then burst into laughter again when he returned to work. By afternoon, the juniper was nothing but a stump and a pile of firewood, tall as a man. He loaded the pieces into his arms and carried them to the nearest cooking fire. An old woman looked up from her grinding stone, face unreadable. Clay set the wood beside her fire pit, nodded once, and walked back for more. 6 trips. The pile was gone. He found another downed tree pine this time. Lightning struck, the bark already peeling. Started again. The widow's shelter leaned badly to the west. Clay noticed it on his way back from the creek. Canteen full, throat still raw from thirst. The hide covering had pulled loose from 2 of the support poles, and one pole itself had cracked near the base, bowing under the weight. The old woman sat inside, visible through the gap, working at something with her hands. Her fingers were gnarled, the knuckles swollen. She didn't look up as Clay approached. He set down his canteen, studied the damaged pole. The crack ran diagonal, almost through. Easy enough to splice if he could find a straight branch the right thickness. He'd done this kind of work before, not with wiki-ups, but with lean-tos in the logging camps. Temporary shelters thrown up against rain. Clay walked to the tree line, found a young pine with a dead lower branch. Straight and dry, cut it free with 3 strokes. Walked back. The widow still hadn't moved. He pulled the cracked pole free, careful not to collapse the whole structure. Lashed the new piece alongside it with strips of rawhide from his own pack, the only supplies he'd managed to keep when the mule died. Tested the join. Solid. He reset the pole, pulled the hide covering tight. Secured it with stones along the bottom edge. The whole repair took maybe an hour. The sun had moved 2 hand-widths across the sky when he finished. My husband died 10 winters ago. The widow's voice came from inside the shelter, thin and dry as old paper. Clay straightened up, brushing dirt from his knees, waited. No one fixed the roof since then. Fixed now, he said. She emerged from the shelter, slow and deliberate, leaning on a walking stick worn smooth by years of use. Her eyes traveled over the repair work, then settled on Clay's face. You don't ask about the chief's daughter. Clay shook his head. Not my business. Not yet. The widow studied him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, not softening. Exactly, but a kind of assessment completed. Maybe you're not as stupid as you look, she said. She turned and went back inside. Gray Horse appeared while Clay was working on the second shelter, a smaller one near the creek where a young mother lived with 2 children. That's women's work. Clay drove another stake into the ground, securing a loose corner of hide, the mallet borrowed from an old man named Crow Feather, who had appeared that morning with tools and shown Clay how to temper the axe blade without speaking a word thudded against wood. It's my work now. Gray Horse stood with his arms crossed, watching. The contempt was still there in his face, but something else moved beneath it. Curiosity, maybe, or the beginning of doubt. The men will laugh. Let them. Clay finished the stake, moved to the next corner. Gray Horse stayed another minute, then walked away without another word. Evening brought the chief's wife to Clay's wickiup. She was younger than Running Elk by many years, her face still smooth, her hair black and shining. She carried a clay bowl covered with a strip of cloth. Venison stew, she said, setting it beside his fire pit. My husband says you work like a man running from something. Clay took the bowl. The steam rose warm against his face, carrying the smell of meat and wild onions. Your husband talks a lot. The woman's lips curved not quite a smile. He watches more than he talks. That's why he's still alive. She paused at the entrance. 3 shelters. The camp is counting. Then she was gone. Clay ate slowly, tasting each bite. The meat was tender, the broth rich with fat. When the bowl was empty, he set it aside and looked down at his hands, calluses on calluses now, cracked skin along the knuckles, a new blister forming at the base of his thumb. They didn't shake. He counted the days since leaving the logging camp. 183. 6 months of watching these same hands tremble in the dark, remembering the weight of the axe, the sound of timber cracking wrong. They were steady now. The fire had burned low when Clay heard the singing. He ducked outside, following the sound. The camp lay quiet under a spray of stars. Most fires banked for the night, only coals glowing here and there among the wickiups. The voice came from the chief's lodge. Clay moved closer, keeping to the shadows, through a gap in the hide covering. Firelight spilled orange across the packed earth. Ayanna sat near the flames, bent over needlework, the shawl draped loose around her shoulders but still covering her face. Her voice rose and fell in a wordless melody, something old, something that seemed to have no beginning and no end. Her hands moved steadily as she sang, small hands, scarred hands, building something beautiful in the dark. Clay watched until his legs ached from standing still. Then he turned back toward his wickiup, the song following him through the night air. But as he reached his shelter, he stopped. Gray Horse stood beside the entrance, arms folded, face unreadable in the starlight. 8 days left, he said. Clay met his gaze. I know how to count. Gray Horse tilted his head. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Gray Horse stepped aside, not a surrender, but something else, an opening. Crow Feather says, you sharpen the axe better now. You listen. He paused. Not many white men listen. He walked away before Clay could answer. In the morning, Clay found something new outside his wickiup. A pair of moccasins, soft deer hide, beaded along the tops in red and white. No note, no sign of who had left them, but the beadwork matched the pattern on the widow's medicine bag. The side canyon narrowed to a slot between red sandstone walls, barely wide enough for Clay to pass with the bundle of firewood on his shoulder. Day 10. He'd stopped counting Gray Horse's deadline and started counting shelters repaired instead. 7 now. The camp had begun leaving small gifts outside his wickiup dried meat, extra rawhide, a clay pot for cooking. Nobody spoke of these things directly. That wasn't the Apache way. Crow Feather had explained through gestures and the few English words he knew. The canyon opened into a small clearing where scrub oak grew thick between tumbled boulders, good wood here, downed branches bleached white by sun and wind. Clay set down his load and pulled the axe from his belt. Then he heard it. A cry, high, sharp, cut short. Clay froze. The sound had come from deeper in the canyon, past the boulders, where the walls rose steep on both sides. He moved toward it, axe in hand. The clearing ended at a jumble of fallen rock, ancient slides that had blocked the canyon floor and created a maze of narrow passages and sudden drops. Clay climbed over the first boulder, then the second, his new moccasins gripping the stone better than his old boots ever had. Another sound. Not a cry, this time a whimper, small, frightened. Clay pulled himself onto a flat ledge and looked down. The crevice dropped maybe 12 feet, narrow at the top, wider at the bottom where sand and debris had collected over years of flash floods. A boy sat at the bottom, knees pulled to his chest, face streaked with dirt and tears. 6 years old, maybe 7. A small medicine bag hung around his neck on a leather cord. Clay had seen this boy before chasing rabbits at the edge of camp, always wandering off alone while his mother called after him. The boy looked up. His eyes went wide. "Stay still," Clay said. He didn't know if the boy understood English, but the tone was clear enough. "I'm coming down." The walls of the crevice were rough, plenty of handholds, but the rock crumbled at the slightest pressure. Clay tucked the axe into his belt and lowered himself over the edge, testing each grip before committing his weight. 3 feet down, 5. A chunk of sandstone broke free under his right hand, and he slammed against the wall, skin scraping through his shirt. He found another hold, kept going. 10 feet. The boy had stopped crying, watching Clay's descent with something between hope and terror. 12 feet. Clay's foot found a narrow ledge. He pressed his back against one wall, feet against the other, and worked his way down the last few feet to the sandy floor. The boy scrambled backward, pressing against the crevice wall. "Easy!" Clay held up both hands, palms out. "Easy now." He knelt in the sand, making himself smaller, less threatening. The boy's breath came fast and shallow, his small chest heaving. "Hurt." Clay pointed at the boy's legs, then his arms. "Hurt anywhere." The boy shook his head. Then he pointed up at the opening, 12 feet above, and said something in Apache that needed no translation. "Stuck." Clay looked at the walls. Getting down had been hard enough. Getting up while carrying a child would be harder. "All right?" He moved closer, slowly, the way he'd once approached a spooked horse in the logging camps. "All right. We're going to climb out together. You hold on to me. Don't let go." The boy stared at him. Clay tapped his own chest. "Clay." Then he pointed at the boy. "Kayla." The voice was barely a whisper. Then, in halting English, "Little Hawk." Clay nodded. "Little Hawk. Good name." He turned his back to the boy and crouched low. "Climb on. Arms around my neck. Hold tight." Small hands gripped his shoulders. Thin arms wrapped around his throat too tight at first, then easing when Clay gently adjusted the hold. The boy weighed almost nothing. Bones and breath and a heartbeat, hammering against Clay's back. Clay stood, tested the first handhold, began to climb. The weight was different this time. 6 months ago, in the Oregon timber. Clay had carried Tom Brennan's body down from the ridge, where the pine had fallen wrong. 200 pounds of dead weight. Blood soaking through Clay's shirt. Tom's eyes open and empty, staring at nothing. This weight was alive. This weight breathed against his neck. Fingers digging into his shoulders, legs wrapped around his waist. Clay's right hand found a solid grip. He pulled himself up, feet searching for purchase on the crumbling stone. Little Hawk whimpered, but didn't let go. 3 feet up. 5. Clay's arms burned. The axe handle dug into his hip where he'd shoved it into his belt. A handhold broke. Clay dropped 6 inches before catching himself, his shoulder slamming into the rock. Little Hawk cried out, grip tightening to choking. "Easy!" Clay gasped. "Almost there." He found another hold, pulled, his fingers screamed, his back muscles cramped. 10 feet, 12. The opening was close now. Bright sky above the red stone walls. One more pull. Clay's hand found the edge of the crevice, rough sandstone biting into his palm. He hauled himself up, Little Hawk clinging to his back like a second skin, and rolled onto the flat ledge above. For a long moment he just lay there, chest heaving, staring at the cloudless sky. Little Hawk's arms loosened. The boy slid off Clay's back and sat beside him, small face pale beneath the dirt. "Okay," Clay managed. The boy nodded. Clay closed his eyes. His hands were shaking now, fine tremors running from fingertips to wrists. but not from fear, not from guilt, from relief. The camp came into view as the sun touched the western ridge. Clay carried little Hawk on his shoulders, the boy's hands gripping his hair, pointing out landmarks and chattering in Apache as if the terror in the crevice had never happened. Children recovered fast, faster than men. A woman's scream split the evening air. Gray Horse's wife, Clay, recognized her from the cooking fires, ran toward them, her long skirt flying behind her. She reached for little Hawk, pulling him from Clay's shoulders, pressing him against her chest, her voice rising and falling in a flood of Apache words. Then Gray Horse appeared. He walked slowly, deliberately, his face carved from stone. The camp had gone quiet around them, everyone watching. Gray Horse stopped 2 feet from Clay. The silence stretched long. Gray Horse's jaw worked, the muscles bunching and releasing. His eyes dropped to his son, now crying in his mother's arms, then lifted to Clay's face. He climbed too high. Clay's voice came out rough, throat raw from dust and exertion. Fell into a crevice, couldn't get out. Gray Horse said nothing. He's stubborn, goes where he shouldn't, still nothing. Reminds me of someone. Something shifted in Gray Horse's face, the stone cracked. Just barely. You brought him back. He's a kid. Anyone would have done it. Gray Horse shook his head, slow and deliberate. No, not anyone. He turned and walked to his wife and son, gathered them both in his arms. Didn't look back. Running Elk waited at Clay's wickiup. The old chief sat on a flat stone near the entrance, hands resting on his knees, watching the reunion across the camp with something unreadable in his ancient eyes. 20 days left, he said as Clay approached. I know. Gray Horse owes you a debt now. That changes things. Clay lowered himself to the ground, his legs finally giving out. Every muscle ached. His scraped shoulder throbbed where his shirt stuck to the raw skin. Didn't do it for him. Running Elk nodded slowly. That's why it matters. The chief rose, movements careful but steady, and walked back toward his lodge. Halfway there, he paused. She asked about you. Clay looked up. My daughter. When you returned with the boy. Running Elk's face was in shadow now, the setting sun behind him. She asked if the child was hurt, but she was looking at you when she said it. The chief walked away. Clay sat alone as darkness gathered, the sounds of the camp settling around him, cooking fires crackling, children being called to supper, the murmur of evening conversations. One voice was missing. No singing from the chief's lodge tonight. The communal fire had burned down to coals when Gray Horse appeared at Clay's side. No words. The warrior simply sat, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and pulled a leather pouch from his belt. He packed a small clay pipe with dark tobacco trade goods from the Spanish settlements far to the south and lit it with a stick from the coals. He took a long draw, held the smoke, released it toward the stars. Then he held the pipe out to Clay. Clay took it. The tobacco was harsh, stronger than anything he'd smoked in the logging camps, but he pulled the smoke into his lungs and held it anyway. They sat like that, passing the pipe back and forth, until the tobacco was ash and the fire was nothing but embers. Gray Horse stood, dusted his hands on his leggings. 8 days left, he said, but his voice had changed. The contempt was gone. He walked into the darkness, and Clay watched him go. Sleep came easier that night, but before it took him, Clay heard something outside his wickiup, a soft footstep, the rustle of fabric. He lay still, listening. Then a voice, low and clear in the darkness. Thank you. 2 words, a woman's voice. By the time Clay reached the entrance, the space outside was empty, but in the dirt near his fire pit, illuminated by the last glow of coals, someone had placed a small bundle. He unwrapped it carefully. Dried venison, sliced thin. A handful of juniper berries, and beneath them, folded with care, a strip of soft buckskin embroidered with tiny birds in flight. The same hands that had washed clothes by the creek at dawn, the same hands that worked needles through leather while singing wordless songs. Clay held the buckskin strip to his face and breathed deep. Sage, wood smoke, and something else underneath something he couldn't name, but would know again anywhere. He lay back on his pallet, the strip of buckskin pressed against his chest. In the morning, he would find her at the creek again. This time, he would not stay silent. Day 16. The camp had stopped watching Clay like a curiosity. The days between rescuing Little Hawk and now had blurred into rhythm, wood chopped, shelters mended, meals shared. Clay ate at the communal fire now, shoulder to shoulder with hunters and elders, passing bowls of stew and strips of dried meat. The children no longer ran away when he approached. They ran toward him, tugging at his sleeves, showing him treasures of feather, a smooth stone, a beetle with iridescent wings. Clay learned words, Shideji for my friend, Ahehi for thank you, Daanjo for how are you, though his pronunciation made the children dissolve into giggles every time. The camp had a rhythm, and Clay had found his place in it. Morning cut wood, repair what needed repairing, afternoon help with hunting preparation, or join the old men making arrows. Evening sit by the fire, listen to stories he couldn't understand but felt in his bones anyway. He counted 9 shelters, fixed now. The widow had started saving him portions of her stew. Crowfeather had given him a bone-handled knife, its blade worn thin from years of sharpening. But it was Ayana he watched. The drying rack stood at the edge of camp, near the horse corral, where the morning sun hit strongest. Strips of venison hung from wooden poles, slowly turning from red to brown as the moisture left them. Ayana worked there every morning. Clay found reasons to pass by, carrying wood to the nearby cooking fire, checking on the horses, repairing a section of the corral fence that had been leaning since before he arrived. She never spoke to him directly, neither did he to her, but a pattern emerged. He stacked firewood where she could reach it easily, close to the drying rack but not so close as to intrude. She left things outside his wickiup at night, more dried meat, a bundle of medicinal herbs, once a small clay pot filled with bear grease, for his cracked hands. They existed in the same space without words, close enough to speak, choosing not to. On the 15th day, Clay watched her mend the widow's blanket. The old woman sat beside Ayana near the creek, holding the worn fabric while Ayana's needle moved in quick, sure stitches. The shawl covered her face as always, but her hands were bare to the morning light, small hands, work roughened, moving with the precision of long practice. On the 16th morning, he watched her teach a girl to weave, the child maybe 8 years old, with braids that reached her waist, sat cross-legged on a blanket, while Ayana guided her fingers through the pattern, patient, never scolding when the girl made mistakes, starting over, showing again, until the pattern held. That afternoon, a baby fell sick in one of the wickiups near the creek. Clay heard the mother's worried voice, then the sound of Ayana singing low and wordless, the same melody he'd heard through the walls of the chief's lodge. He passed by once, twice, carrying loads of firewood he didn't need, just to hear that voice, The singing went on until sunset. By nightfall, the baby's fever had broken. Clay sat outside his wickiup and thought about what he'd seen. Whatever was wrong with her, whatever made the camp whisper and neighboring bands refuse to consider her, it had nothing to do with her hands, nothing to do with her voice, nothing to do with the way she cared for the old and the young and the sick without being asked. He'd never once seen her face, but he was starting to understand he might not need to. Gray Horse found him by the horse corral the next morning. The warrior leaned against the fence, watching the animals move in their slow circles. His face was different now, not friendly. Exactly, but no longer hostile. The debt of Little Hawk's rescue hung between them. Unspoken but present. She had someone before, Gray Horse said. No greeting, no preamble. A man from the southern band came to ask for her 2 summers ago. Clay kept his eyes on the horses. What happened? She showed him her face. Gray Horse's voice was flat. Matter of fact, he left the same day. Didn't even wait for morning. The horses circled. Dust rose under their hooves. Why do they say she's cursed? Gray Horse was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped. Her mother died giving birth. Some people... He shrugged, a gesture that held more weariness than dismissal. Apache superstition. Even wise men believe foolish things. They say she brought death into the world with her first breath. That whoever marries her will follow her mother into the ground. Clay thought of the singing, the mended blanket, the baby's fever breaking. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Gray Horse looked at him, one eyebrow raised. Maybe, or maybe you're the stupid one. Could be both. Something that might have been a smile crossed Gray Horse's face. He pushed off from the fence. 14 days left, he said. In case you forgot. I haven't. Gray Horse walked away, but at the edge of the corral, he paused. She never sang for the other one, he said over his shoulder. The man from the southern band. 2 weeks he was here. Not once did she sing where he could hear. Then he was gone. The chief summoned Clay that evening. Running Elk sat by his fire, a clay pipe in one hand, smoke curling toward the smoke hole above. The kerosene lamp trade goods from Mexican merchants. Crowfeather had explained cast yellow light across the old man's weathered face. Sit, Clay sat. 14 days remain. The chief drew on his pipe, held the smoke, released it slowly. You may still leave. No one would think less of you. My daughter. He paused. She is not an easy path. I'm not looking for easy. Running Elk studied him through the smoke. Why did you come here to our land? The question sat heavy in the air. Clay had answered versions of it before to the chief, to Gray Horse, to himself in the dark hours before dawn, but this time, something different rose in his throat. I killed a man. The chief's expression didn't change. Not with my hands, with my mistakes. A tree I cut fell wrong. He couldn't get out of the way in time. Clay's voice stayed level, but his hands had curled into fists on his knees. I ran after that. 6 months of running. Ended up here. Silence. And now. Clay thought about it. Really thought. Now I fix things, he said, instead of breaking them. Running Elk nodded slowly. Something in his ancient eyes shifted understanding. Maybe. Or recognition. Do you still wish to continue, more than before? The chief rose. Movements low, but certain. Then continue. Clay ducked out of the wickiup into the night air. The camp lay quiet around him. Fires burning low. Families settling into their lodges. Bastata, across the open space, near the chief's lodge, a figure stood watching. Ayana. The shawl covered her face, as always, but she wasn't moving, wasn't retreating into shadow. Clay raised one hand, the same gesture he'd made on his first day in camp. This time, she didn't turn away. She stood there for a long moment, 10 heartbeats, 20, then slowly, deliberately. She lifted her own hand, then she was gone, disappearing into the chief's lodge. The creek ran silver under the stars. Clay knelt at the water's edge, cupping the cold water to his face, washing away the day's dust. His arms ached from work. His back protested when he straightened. He sensed her before he saw her. A presence on the far bank, half hidden in shadow, the pale shape of a deerskin dress, the darker outline of the shawl. Clay's hands stilled in the water. "Why do you stay?" Her voice carried across the creek, clear and soft in the darkness, the first real words between them since his arrival. Clay sat back on his heels. The water dripped from his fingers, cold on his skin, because I was lost. The truth came easier in the dark, and I got tired of it, tired of running, tired of going nowhere. Silence. The creek murmured between them. Then her voice again, lower now. "I know what that feels like." Something caught in her throat. He heard it, a tremor, a crack in the steadiness. She stepped back from the water's edge, retreating into the deeper shadows beneath the trees. "Wait," Clay said. She stopped. "The man from the south, the one who left." Another long pause. "What about him?" "He was a fool." Silence. "You haven't seen my face. I've seen enough." She stood there, motionless, a darker shape against the darkness. Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps soft on the pine needles, fading until there was nothing but the sound of the creek and Clay's own breathing. He stayed by the water until the stars wheeled overhead and the cold seeped through his clothes into his bones. The next morning, Gray Horse found him at the woodpile. "My uncle wants to see you." Clay set down the axe, followed Gray Horse to the chief's lodge. Running Elk sat in his usual place, but he wasn't alone. The widow was there, Crowfeather, 2 other elders Clay didn't know by name, and standing near the back, half in shadow, her hands folded before her, Ayana. The shawl covered her face, but Clay could feel her watching him. 14 days remain," the chief said. "But the camp has decided. They don't need to wait." Clay's heart thudded against his ribs. The marriage ceremony will be held in 2 days. The nightmare came 2 nights before the ceremony. Clay woke with Tom Brennan's name in his mouth and his hands clawing at the buffalo hide beneath him. His chest heaved. Sweat soaked through his shirt, cold against his skin in the pre-dawn chill. The sound of the tree falling echoed in his skull, that crack, that impossible slow-motion lean. Tom's face turning up white as bone. Clay stumbled outside. The camp lay dark and quiet. Fires banked to coals, the stars fading toward gray in the east. He walked without direction, his feet carrying him past the horse corral, past the drying racks, past the creek, until he reached the base of the hill where he'd stood watching sunsets alone. He climbed. At the top, he dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead to the cold earth. His breath came in ragged gasps. The shaking had started fine tremors running through his hands, up his arms, into his chest. 6 months, 6 months of running, and the nightmare still found him. He pressed his palms flat against the dirt, feeling the grit under his fingers, the cold seeping into his skin, grounding himself, trying to stop the shaking. It didn't work. The tremors grew worse, his stomach clenched, and he barely had time to turn his head before he vomited thin bile. Nothing solid, just his body rejecting the memory that wouldn't let him go. He retched until there was nothing left. Then he lay there, cheek pressed to the dirt. The smell of his own sickness sharp in his nostrils, mixing with the dust and dead grass beneath him. This was what he was, not the woodcutter who fixed shelters, not the man who saved Little Hawk. Just a broken creature who couldn't outrun his own guilt, lying face down in his own filth on a hilltop in Apache country. The great white savior, the man who'd earned respect through honest work. Pathetic. The sun rose. Clay didn't move. He heard the camp stirring below voices, cooking fires crackling to life, children calling to each other, the sounds of a world that had started to accept him, a world that didn't know what he really was. Footsteps on the hillside, white man, sick. Gray Horse's voice, somewhere behind him. Clay didn't answer, couldn't. His throat was raw, his body emptied out, his face still pressed against the ground where bird vomit had dried into the dirt inches from his cheek. The footsteps came closer, stopped. I smell it. Still Clay didn't move. The shame pressed down on him like a physical weight, the camp's woodcutter, the shelter fixer, the hero who pulled a child from a crevice, lying in his own mess like a sick dog. Gray Horse crouched beside him. Clay felt the warrior's shadow fall across his back, but couldn't make himself look up. Bad dream. A grunt. The only answer Clay could manage. Get up. Clay didn't move. I said get up. Gray Horse's hand closed on Clay's shoulder, fingers digging in hard. The camp watches. My uncle watches. You lie here like this. Everyone sees. The words cut through the fog. Clay pushed himself up on trembling arms, dirt and dried bile caking his chin. His shirt soaked through with sweat and grime. He must have looked like something dragged from a riverbed. Gray Horse studied him. No contempt this time, something else, recognition. The war against the Mexicans, Gray Horse said quietly. I killed 3 men. Watched them die. One was young, younger than Little Hawk is now. A boy with a knife, trying to protect his family. Clay's hands curled into fists against the dirt. That boy visits me some nights. Gray Horse's voice stayed flat. I wake up the same as you. Sweat, shaking, wanting to empty my guts. The silence stretched between them. You carry a dead man, Gray Horse said. I can see it. Everyone can see it. You think my uncle didn't know. You think the camp didn't notice. Clay's voice came out a croak. Then why? Because carrying the dead is not the same as being dead. Gray Horse stood. Get up. Wash yourself. My uncle's wife saved you food. Don't shame her by missing it. He walked away down the hill without looking back. The creek water was cold enough to make Clay's teeth ache. He scrubbed his face, his neck, his hands, peeled off his soiled shirt and dunked it in the current, wringing it out until the water ran clear. The morning sun hit his bare back, warming the skin but doing nothing for the cold that had settled somewhere deeper. He was still kneeling there, shirtless and shivering, when the widow appeared. She stood on the bank with a bundle in her arms, her gnarled hands folded over the fabric. Her face held no expression as she looked at him, at the scars on his back from logging accidents, at the raw scrape on his shoulder from the crevice climb, at the hollowness in his eyes. You smell better, she said. Clay couldn't find words. The widow tossed the bundle at him. He caught it, fumbling, the fabric soft against his water-cold fingers. The chief's wife stayed up 3 nights making that, the widow said. The beadwork took her longest. Red and white, the old patterns. As Clay unfolded the bundle, a shirt buckskin, soft as anything he'd ever touched. Beaded along the collar and sleeves in intricate designs. For the ceremony, the widow said. My husband wore one like it when we married, 43 winters ago. Clay's throat closed. Put it on. The widow's voice allowed no argument. Stand up. Act like a man who deserves what he's being given. He pulled the shirt over his head. The leather settled against his damp skin, warm from the sun, carrying the faint scent of smoke and sage. The widow looked him up and down. Then she nodded once. The girl watches you, she said, every day. Thinks nobody notices. But I notice. 70 years I've been watching women watch men. Clay waited. She's scared. The widow's voice softened. Barely. Not of you, of hope. She gave up on it a long time ago. When you look at her tomorrow, remember that. She's been told she's ugly so many times she believes it. One wrong look from you, and she'll close like a door and never open again. The old woman turned and walked away, her stick tapping against the stones. Running Elk found him at sunset. The chief walked slowly to where Clay sat at the base of the hill, his old knees protesting the uneven ground. He lowered himself onto a flat rock and said nothing for a long while. Gray Horse told me about this morning. Clay's jaw tightened. Do you know why I chose you? The chief's voice was quiet. A stranger, a white man. A man who stumbled into our land with nothing but a dead mule and guilt heavy enough to drown in. No. Running Elk nodded. When you came into my lodge that first night, I looked at your hands. They were shaking. Not from cold, from something deeper. I've seen that shake before. In warriors who've killed too many, in women who've buried too many children. The sun dropped toward the ridge. My daughter has that same shake, the chief said. She hides it. But I see. A father always sees. She believes she is cursed that everyone who loves her will die, as her mother died. Clay's hands curled against his knees. I didn't need a warrior for her. I needed a man who knows what it means to carry something heavy, who can look at her face tomorrow and see the woman, not the mark. The mark. The chief was silent for a moment. A birthmark on her cheek, in certain light. It's barely visible. In other light, it's darker. The man from the south, he saw it and couldn't hide his reaction. She's worn the shawl ever since. Clay thought of the hands he'd watched these past weeks, the voice that sang wordless songs. I won't flinch. You say that now. The chief's voice hardened. But tomorrow, in front of everyone, when you lift the veil, your face will tell the truth whether you want it to or not. One moment of hesitation, and you will destroy her. I won't flinch. Running Elk studied him for a long time. Then he rose and walked back toward camp. The hilltop was cold when Ayanna came. Clay heard her footsteps before he saw her soft, hesitant, pausing twice on the climb. She emerged from the darkness and stopped 6 feet away, the shawl wrapped tight around her face and shoulders. For a long moment, neither spoke. Tomorrow you'll see, she said finally. Her voice shook. And then you'll understand why they call me what they call me. Clay turned to face her. The stars provided just enough light to see the outline of her shape, the pale fabric of her dress. I watched you teach the girl to weave, he said. You never lost patience. Not once. She didn't move. I watched you mend the widow's blanket, heard you sing for the sick baby until its fever broke. The shawl shifted slightly. I haven't seen your face, Clay said, but I've seen you. Every day for a month. Your face is just what's left. Silence. The man from the south. Her voice broke. He looked at me like he was a fool. She flinched. He saw a mark on your skin and missed everything else. Clay's voice stayed level. I've seen what you do, how you care for people. Your face doesn't change that. The silence stretched long between them. Then Ayanna stepped closer, close enough that Clay could smell sage and wood smoke in her hair. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. Her hand found his in the darkness, small, work roughened, trembling. He held it, feeling the scar across her palm, feeling her pulse race beneath the skin. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, she pulled away, walked back down the hill, her footsteps fading into the night. Clay stayed until dawn. He woke to drums. The drums beat steady as heartbeats. Clay stood in the shallow part of the creek, water up to his knees, while Crow Feather and 2 other elders poured gourds of cold water over his head and shoulders. The shock of it drove the air from his lungs. He gasped, and they poured again. Purification. Grey Horse had explained it that morning, his English rough but clear. The water washed away the old life. What emerged would be new. The elders chanted words Clay couldn't understand, prayers, maybe, or blessings. Their voices rose and fell with the rhythm of the drums that echoed from the camp above. When they finished, Clay waded to the bank. The morning air hit his wet skin and raised goose flesh across his arms and chest. One of the elders handed him a length of cloth trade goods, cotton, rough against his pruned fingers, and he dried himself as best he could. Then came the shirt. The widow appeared with the buckskin garment folded over her arms. Her face was solemn, but something moved behind her eyes as she held it out to him. Clay pulled it over his head. The leather settled against his damp skin, soft and warm, carrying the scent of smoke and cedar. The beadwork caught the early light red and white patterns along the collar and sleeves. His axe came last. Grey Horse brought it, the blade freshly oiled, the worn handle gleaming. He handed it to Clay without a word, and Clay tucked it into his belt the way he'd done every day since arriving. Ready to, Grey Horse asked. Clay's hands weren't shaking. For the first time in 6 months, they were absolutely still. Ready. The entire camp had gathered in the clearing between the chief's lodge and the communal fire pit. Clay walked through the crowd, aware of every eye on him, curious, appraising. Some still uncertain, children pressed against their mothers' legs, watching the white man pass. Warriors stood with arms folded, their faces giving nothing away. He found his place near the fire pit, where Running Elk waited. The chief wore a headdress Clay hadn't seen before, eagle feathers cascading down his back, each one earned through acts the old man never spoke of. His face was painted with red and white stripes, and the silver and turquoise necklace hung heavy on his bare chest. Grey Horse took position to Clay's right, standing witness. His face had lost all trace of the contempt it had held that first day. He gave Clay a single nod. On the other side of the fire, the widow stood with little Hawk in her arms. The boy's medicine bag hung around his neck, and when he saw Clay, he waved one small hand. Clay raised his fingers in return. Then the drums changed. The rhythm slowed, deepened, became something ancient and solemn. The crowd parted. Ayanna emerged from her father's lodge. 2 older women walked beside her, their hands steadying her elbows. She wore white deerskin, a dress that must have taken months to make, soft as clouds, beaded with patterns more intricate than Clay's shirt. Her hair was braided with red cloth and feathers, the shawl still covered her face. She moved slowly across the clearing, each step measured, the women guiding her toward the fire pit. Clay watched her come and felt his heart thudding against his ribs, not fear. Something else. She stopped before him, close enough that he could see her hands trembling where they hung at her sides, close enough that he could smell sage in her hair. Running Elk raised his arms. The drums fell silent. The chief began to speak. Clay understood perhaps one word in 5. The language rolled over him like water sounds that had been spoken here for generations. Prayers that came before the arrival of horses, before white men, before everything that had changed this land. But the rhythm was clear. The meaning beneath the words, two becoming one. Separate lives joining, a future built from broken pasts. The elders responded in unison at certain points, their voices a low rumble. The crowd watched in silence. Clay kept his eyes on Ayanna. Her hands had stopped trembling. They hung at her sides now, still and waiting. Through the shawl, he could see the outline of her face, the shape of a jaw, the curve of a nose, nothing more. Running Elk's voice rose, then fell. He turned to Clay. "Do you take this woman?" The English words sounded strange after so much Apache. "Unseen, as your wife, to provide for her, to protect her, to honor her until your final breath." The clearing was silent. Even the wind had stopped. Clay looked at the woman before him, at the hands he'd watched mend blankets and teach children, at the shoulders that carried water for the old and sang for the sick, at the shape of a person he'd come to know without ever seeing her face. "I take her." Running Elk waited. "I've watched her work," Clay said. His voice came out rough, the words plain. "I've heard her sing. I know who she is. That's what matters." The silence held. Then Running Elk turned to his daughter. He spoke in Apache, the words soft and low. Ayanna answered a single word, barely audible. Her father nodded. "She accepts," Running Elk said to Clay. The chief's wife came forward with a blanket old wool, faded but clean, big enough to wrap around 2 people standing close. She draped it over Clay's shoulders, then over Ayanna's, so they stood cocooned together in the heavy fabric. Clay could feel Ayanna's warmth through the deerskin dress, could smell the sage in her hair, could sense the tension in her body. Running Elk spoke again. The elders responded. The drums began a new rhythm, soft and slow. Then the chief turned to Clay and switched to English. "The veil must be lifted by your hands. This is our way. What you see, you accept, and what you accept, you keep. There is no going back after this moment." Clay's throat tightened. "Do you understand?" "Yes." Running Elk stepped aside. Clay and Ayanna stood alone before the fire, the blanket wrapped around them both. The entire camp watching in silence. Her face was inches from his, hidden behind the woven shawl. He could feel her breathing quick and shallow, the breath of someone bracing for a blow. Clay raised his hands. They didn't shake, not even a tremor. He thought of Tom Brennan, the tree falling wrong, 6 months of running, of nightmares, of hands that wouldn't stop trembling no matter how hard he clenched them. Those hands were steady now. He thought of the widow's blanket, mended with careful stitches, the baby's fever breaking, the girl learning to weave, all the things he'd seen without ever seeing her face. His fingers found the edge of the shawl. Ayanna drew a sharp breath. Her whole body tensed. "I already know," Clay said quietly, low enough that only she could hear. "Whatever's under here, I already know who you are." She didn't answer, but her hands, hidden beneath the blanket, found his wrists, not stopping him. Just holding on, Clay drew a breath. The camp held its collective breath with him. The widow leaned forward, her old eyes fixed on Clay's face. Gray Horse's jaw tightened. Running Elk stood motionless, his painted face revealing nothing. Little Hawk squirmed in the widow's arms, trying to see. The fire crackled. A bird called somewhere in the distance. Clay's fingers tightened on the edge of the shawl. He thought of the man from the southern band, the one who had seen her face and fled before morning, the one who had looked at her and seen only the mark. That man had been a fool. Clay wasn't going to be a fool. He looked at Ayanna's hidden face one last time, at the shape of her beneath the woven fabric, at the woman who had left gifts outside his wickiup, who had sung where he could hear, who had come to him on a hilltop in the dark and said she was scared. She was still scared. He could feel it in the tension of her body, in the way her fingers gripped his wrists, in the quick, shallow rhythm of her breathing. So was he, but fear had never stopped him before. Clay pulled the shawl upward. The fabric lifted, and her face came into the light. The shawl fell away. Her face was pale in the morning light, the bones fine and sharp beneath skin that had rarely seen full sun. Dark hair framed high cheekbones, a straight nose, lips pressed thin with fear, and on her left cheek, running from below her eye to the corner of her jaw, a birthmark the color of autumn leaves in the morning light. It was darker than the rest of her skin, a shape like a bird in flight, or a cloud, or nothing at all. Just a mark, just a piece of her, the same as her hands, or her voice, or the way she held her shoulders. Clay didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He looked at her, all of her, and watched her eyes widen, dark eyes, deep and searching, already filling with tears she was trying not to shed. The crowd was silent. The drums had stopped. The whole world held its breath. Clay raised one hand, touched his thumb to the birthmark on her cheek. Her skin was warm beneath his fingers. A single tear broke free, running down to where his thumb rested against her face. "There you are," he said. Her lips parted. No sound came out. "Been looking for you." The tear fell onto his thumb. Another followed. Then her knees buckled, not fainting. Just the sudden release of tension held too long, and Clay caught her. One arm around her waist, holding her upright. She pressed her face against his chest, her shoulders shaking, her hands gripping the front of his buckskin shirt. The sounds coming from her weren't words. They were something older than words, something that had been locked away so long it no longer knew how to escape properly. Clay held on. The camp erupted. Voices rose around them, shouts, cheers, the high-pitched cry of the women that cut through the morning air. Children broke from their mothers and ran in circles around the fire pit, laughing. The drums thundered back to life, faster now, joyful. Clay barely heard any of it. Ayanna's face was still pressed against his chest, her tears soaking through the beaded buckskin. Her whole body trembled, but her grip on his shirt had loosened. She was breathing slower now, steadier. He didn't rush her, didn't try to make her look up before she was ready. The widow appeared at his elbow, her old face creased in something that might have been a smile. "Didn't flinch," she said. "No. Good." She patted his arm once, her gnarled fingers surprisingly gentle, then walked away. Ayanna lifted her head. Her face was streaked with tears, the birthmark dark against her flushed skin. She looked at him like she was seeing something impossible. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why didn't you? Because it doesn't matter." Her hands rose toward her cheek, an old reflex, years of hiding. Clay caught them before they reached her face. "Don't," he said. "Not with me. Not anymore." She stared at him. Then she laughed. It came out broken, half sob, half something else, a sound that didn't know what it wanted to be. But it was real. It was hers. The feast began at midday and showed no sign of stopping. Roasted venison steamed on wooden platters, clay pots of stew passed from hand to hand. Mesquite bean cakes, still warm, appeared in baskets. The smell of cooking meat and wood smoke filled the air, mixing with sage and the sweeter scent of ceremonial herbs burning near the fire pit. Clay sat beside Ayanna on a blanket near the chief's lodge, their shoulders touching. She had not put the shawl back on. Her face was bare to the afternoon sun, the birthmark visible to anyone who cared to look. No one stared. No one whispered. The widow approached first. She moved slowly, her walking stick tapping against the packed earth, but her eyes were sharp as she studied them. "You didn't run," she said to Clay. "No. The other one ran. He was a fool." The widow's lips twitched. She reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small leather pouch, worn soft with age. "My grandmother made this," she said. "Gave it to my mother when she married. My mother gave it to me. I had no daughter." She pressed the pouch into Clay's palm. "For your first child." Clay's throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing. Just don't waste it." She walked away before either of them could respond. Gray Horse came as the sun began its descent. He carried 2 clay cups, filled with something that smelled sharp. He handed one to Clay, kept the other, and lowered himself to the ground across from them. "I lost my horse," Gray Horse said. Clay blinked. "What?" "The bet. 10 days. Gray Horse shrugged. "You lasted longer. I lost." Ayanna made a small sound beside him. "Keep the horse," Clay said. "I don't need it." Gray Horse shook his head. "A debt is a debt." He took a long drink from his cup. "But I will say this. You are not Apache by blood. Your skin is wrong. Your language is wrong." Clay waited. Gray Horse met his eyes. "But you are Apache here." He tapped his chest. "And here." He tapped his forehead. "The camp sees it. My uncle sees it." He extended his hand, palm open, the way Clay had seen white men greet each other back east. Clay took it. Gray Horse's grip was firm. "Brother," Gray Horse said. Then he rose and walked away. The feast continued into evening. Someone produced a bone flute. Someone else brought out a small drum. The music that rose was nothing like the hymns Clay remembered from childhood, nothing like the drinking songs from the logging camps. This was older, deeper. People danced. Children ran between adults' legs. The fires burned high, and stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. Clay and Ayanna sat apart from the celebration, at the edge of the firelight. "I made something for you," Clay said. "Left it outside your wickiup. Before." Ayanna reached into a fold of her dress and pulled out the carved bird. It rested in her palm, small and rough. The wings spread as if in flight. "You knew," she said, "about the mark." Clay shook his head. "I didn't know what it looked like. I just carved what came into my head." Ayanna turned the carving over in her hands. The firelight caught the grain of the wood. "It looks like it," she said quietly. "The mark. It looks like a bird." Clay stared at her, at the birthmark on her cheek, at the carved bird in her palm. I didn't know, he said. I believe you. She tucked the carving back into her dress, close to her heart. Then she leaned against him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder. Why did you really stay? She asked. That first morning. You could have walked away. Clay thought about it, the creek at dawn, her hands in the water. I was tired, he said. Tired of running. Tired of being empty. He paused. And I saw you working, not giving up. I thought maybe I could do that too. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. I was going to give up, she said, before you came. One more man turning away. And I would have believed what everyone said about me. Clay's arm tightened around her. Then you walked in, starving, looking worse than anyone in camp. A small laugh escaped her. My father said, this one. I thought he was crazy. Maybe he was. Maybe. She lifted her head, meeting his eyes. But he was right. The feast wound down as the moon rose. Families drifted toward their wickiups. Children carried sleeping in their parents' arms. The fires burned lower. Running Elk appeared beside them, his headdress removed, his painted face washed clean. He looked older now, tired, but something in his eyes had softened. You did well, he said to Clay. Better than I hoped. You gambled, Clay said. On a stranger, the chief nodded. I gambled on what I saw in you, the same thing I see in her. He looked at his daughter, the willingness to keep going, even when it hurts. Ayanna rose and embraced her father. The old man held her tight. Be happy, he said into her hair. That's all I ever wanted. She pulled back, tears on her face again. I will try. That's all any of us can do. Running Elk walked away toward his lodge. The camp fell silent around them. Clay and Ayanna walked to the edge of the clearing, where the land fell away toward the valley below. The moon hung full and bright above the mountains. The creek glinted silver in the distance. What happens now? Ayanna asked. Clay looked out at the land, the mountains, the valley, the vast sky, a month ago. He'd stumbled into this place with nothing but a dead mule and a weight he couldn't put down. A man running from his own hands. That man was gone now. We build something, he said, together. Ayanna's hand found his, small, work roughened, the scar across her palm pressing against his calluses. I am still scared, she said. So am I. What if... Then we figure it out. He turned to face her. We make mistakes. We fix them. We keep going. She studied his face in the moonlight. Then she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his brief. Tentative. Clay kissed her back when they parted. She was smiling, a real smile, transforming her face into something he would remember for the rest of his life. I never thought I'd have this, she said. Neither did I. They stood together at the edge of camp, looking out at the land that stretched to the horizon. Behind them, the fires had burned down to coals. The birthmark on her cheek caught the moonlight. Clay didn't look away. She had given him her fear. He had given her his broken pieces. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out once, then fell silent, a small sound swallowed by the quiet of the frontier, where two people who had been running in different directions had finally found a place to stop. There's something quiet that stays with us after a story like this one. Something tender, maybe. Something familiar in a way that doesn't need explaining. It settles somewhere in the chest, and that's where it belongs. Many of us have carried things we couldn't show anyone. Some of us have worked without thanks, loved without recognition, hidden parts of ourselves, because we learned early that the world wasn't always gentle with what made us different. Perhaps you've known what it feels like to be looked at and not truly seen. Perhaps you've been the one who finally saw someone else when no one else would. These feelings don't need to be resolved tonight. They're allowed to rest exactly where they are, unfinished, still breathing. A story ends, but what it stirs in us takes its own time. It's all right to sit with it. It's all right to let it be. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.